The bank officer slammed the folder onto the counter so hard that the pen rolled off the edge and clattered to the floor. He didn't pick it up. He looked at Caleb Whitmore like he was looking at a stain on the carpet, something that needed to be removed, not reasoned with. "Sign it," he said, "or we take the truck Monday morning. Your father's name on the side won't matter to the tow company." Caleb's hands were shaking, not from fear, from something much worse, from knowing his father died, believing that good people always find a way. He wasn't sure he believed that anymore. Before we go any further, if you've ever held on to something that meant everything to you, even when the world told you to let go, this story is for you. Subscribe to this channel, hit that notification bell, and drop a comment right now telling me what city or town you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Now let's go back to where it all began. Caleb Whitmore had not slept properly in 11 days. He knew the exact number because he had started counting. From the morning the certified letter arrived, the one with the bank's return address stamped in red ink, the one he had left unopened on the passenger seat of the truck for 6 hours before he finally tore it open at a red light and nearly ran into the car in front of him. 11 days of lying in the back of his father's old trailer at night, staring at the ceiling doing math in his head that never added up. 11 days of waking before sunrise, driving the truck to whatever small-town corner or church parking lot or county fairground might bring in a few customers, and smiling genuinely, smiling at every single person who walked up to that window. Because his father always said, the moment you stop being grateful for the people who show up is the moment you've lost something you can't get back from a bank. His father, Earl Whitmore, had spent 25 years in that truck. 25 years of 4 a.m. mornings, flour on his forearms, butter browning in iron pans, pie shells crimped by hand because he said a machine could never get the edge right, it lacked the intention. 25 years of building something small and stubborn and beloved in Cedar Hollow, Kentucky, a town the highway bypassed in 1987 and never came back to a town where people knew your grandmother's name and remembered what you brought to the church potluck in 2003. Earl used to say, the pie truck wasn't a business. It was a conversation he was having with the whole community, one slice at a time. And the community talked back. They showed up. They brought their kids. They argued about whether the bourbon pecan was better than the peach. And Earl always told them they were both wrong. And the answer was the apple with the brown sugar crust. And they laughed every single time like it was the first time he'd said it. Then Earl Whitmore had a massive heart attack on a Tuesday in March in the parking lot of the Piggly Wiggly, loading a 50-pound bag of sugar into his truck. The paramedics said he was gone before he hit the ground. The doctor said it was fast that he didn't suffer, and Caleb had held on to that for months like a rope over water. He didn't suffer. His father didn't suffer. But Caleb had been suffering every day since. Not just from grief, though. The grief was real. It lived in him like a stone behind his sternum that he couldn't cough out, but from the weight of what he had inherited. Because along with the truck, the recipes written in his father's cramped, left-handed scrawl on index cards, stained with butter and vanilla, along with the worn rolling pin and the cast-iron pans and the faded photo of Earl taped inside the cabinet above the pie safe, along with all of that, Caleb had also inherited the debt. The loan his father took out 3 years before his death to replace the engine and upgrade the refrigeration unit. A loan Earl had been paying down steadily, responsibly, the way he did everything, until a respiratory illness the winter before his death wiped out 2 months of income and pushed him behind. Earl meant to catch it up. He had a plan. He always had a plan. But Earl didn't make it to spring. And the bank, specifically a loan officer named Gerald Pruitt, who wore short-sleeved dress shirts year-round and had never once in Caleb's experience offered a handshake before delivering bad news, had been circling that debt like a bird that knew something on the ground wasn't going to make it much longer. It was Pruitt who had slammed that folder down on the counter. It was Pruitt who watched Caleb's hands shake without blinking, without softening. It was Pruitt who said with the kind of rehearsed flatness that told you he'd said this exact sentence to other desperate people in this exact room. The institution has been more than patient, Mr. Whitmore. Caleb had wanted to ask him which institution he meant, the bank, or the long tradition of men like Pruitt, who had never built anything with their hands, telling men like Earl Whitmore that what they built wasn't worth saving. He didn't say that. He nodded. He picked up the pen from the floor. He left without signing anything. That had been 11 days ago. Now it was a Wednesday in late July, the hottest part of the Kentucky summer, the kind of afternoon where the asphalt breathed up at you and the air itself felt used. Caleb had parked the truck on the edge of the Cedar Hollow Town Square, in the spot his father had used for the better part of 2 decades, under the partial shade of an old oak that had lost 2 major limbs in the ice storm the previous winter, and was starting to look as tired as Caleb felt. Business had been slow all day. Not unusual for a weekday. Not unusual for July, when people stayed inside and stretched their grocery budgets and told themselves they'd treat themselves later. Caleb understood it. He didn't take it personally, or he tried not to. He had sold 11 slices by 2 in the afternoon. 11 slices at $3.75 each. You didn't have to be a mathematician to understand that $41.25 was not going to move the needle on what he owed. He was wiping down the counter inside the truck when he did the inventory. 1 slice left. 1 slice of homemade peach pie, the filling made from peaches that old Mrs. Garrity 2 roads over had brought him in a paper bag last week. She grew them in her backyard. Wouldn't take a cent for them, said Earl. Had always gotten first pick, and she wasn't about to change that just because Earl was gone. Caleb had made that pie at 5 in the morning the way his father taught him. He had crimped the edge by hand. He was going to pack it up, take it home, eat it, standing at the kitchen counter, the way he ate most things now alone, reading whatever came up on his phone to fill the silence. That was when he heard the sound of feet on gravel. He looked up. The boy crossing the parking lot was maybe 8 years old, small for his age, or maybe he just seemed small because of the size of the summer around him, the wide, flat heat of the afternoon. He had dark hair that curled at his neck and ears, and he was wearing a striped shirt with a small hole at the shoulder seam. He walked with the particular focus of a child who had been sent somewhere with a purpose, and was taking that purpose very seriously. He stopped at the truck window. He looked at the single slice of peach pie in the display case. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out a handful of coins, and he began counting them on the ledge of the window. Slowly, methodically, moving each coin aside as he counted it the way a child does when they're making absolutely sure they aren't miscounting and giving themselves hope they don't have. Caleb watched him without saying anything. He'd learned a long time ago working beside his father that you don't rush a person doing something important. And this boy, this small, serious boy with the hole in his shirt, was doing something important. Finally, the boy looked up. He had brown eyes, level and unashamed. The eyes of a kid who had learned early that embarrassment is a waste of energy. "How much is a slice?" he asked. $3.75, Caleb said. The boy looked back at his coins. He didn't move them around. He just looked at them for a moment, and Caleb could see without counting them himself that there wasn't $3.75 there. There wasn't even $3. There were quarters and dimes and a couple of nickels, and maybe it added up to $2 and some change. The boy looked back up at Caleb. And here was the thing about his expression: it wasn't desperate. It wasn't the look of a child about to cry or beg or try to manipulate the situation. It was something quieter than that, something more careful. It was the look of a child who had already done the math, already known the answer wasn't going to be what he wanted, and had come anyway because showing up mattered even when you came up short. "I've got $2.30, the boy said. "Can I pay the rest tomorrow? I promise I'll bring it." Caleb set down the cloth he'd been using to wipe the counter. "What's your name?" "Eli." "You from around here, Eli?" "Yes, sir. We live on Clover Road, the yellow house with the broken gutter." Caleb nodded slowly. He knew that road, knew the yellow house too, had driven past it 100 times without thinking about who lived there. Now he thought about it. "That pie's for you?" he asked. Eli shook his head, and in the shaking of that small head was an entire story. "It's for my mom. It's her birthday. She hasn't had a real birthday in a long time, since my dad was—" He stopped, started again. "She says she doesn't need anything, but she likes peaches. She always smells them at the grocery store, even when we're not buying them." Caleb was quiet for a moment. 11 days of not sleeping, $41.25 in the register. A bank officer with a folder full of paperwork and a pen on the floor. A truck with his father's name on the side that was going to disappear unless something changed in the next 72 hours. That was the situation. And then there was this boy with $2.30 and a plan to bring his mother a birthday pie because she smelled peaches in the grocery store and put them back on the shelf. Caleb reached into the display case. He lifted out the last slice of peach pie. He slid it into one of his father's white bakery boxes, the ones with the little window on top, so you could see what was inside the ones Earl had special ordered from a company in Louisville, because he said presentation was a form of respect. He folded the box closed and tied the thin white string around it in a bow. His father had always tied a bow, and he set it on the counter. "No charge," Caleb said. Eli stared at the box, then at Caleb. "I can't take it for free." "You're not taking it for free. I'm giving it. There's a difference." "My mom says charity." "It's not charity. You told me what it's for. The man who made that pie thinks your mother deserves something sweet on her birthday. That's not charity. That's just the truth." He pushed the box across the counter. "Go on. The ice will take the edge off the walk home." Eli picked up the box with both hands the way you carry something that matters to you. He held it level. He started to turn away, then stopped. He turned back. "What's your name?" he asked. "Caleb." "I'm going to tell her your name," Eli said, "so she knows who to thank." "You don't have to do that." "I want to," the boy said. Simple as that. Not a performance, just the genuine intention of a child who had been raised to mean what he said. He walked back across the gravel lot. He didn't run. He walked carefully, holding the box level, and Caleb watched him until he reached the sidewalk and turned toward Clover Road and disappeared. Caleb stood at the window for a long moment after the boy was gone. Then he reached up and switched off the display case light. He counted the money in the register. He sat in the driver's seat and looked through the windshield at the empty parking lot and the old oak with its missing limbs and the town square where nothing was happening in the late afternoon heat. His father's voice came back to him, then not as a memory of a specific conversation, but as something embedded deeper than that, a kind of running narration Earl had provided over the course of Caleb's life. "You'll know what this is all for when you stop asking what it's all for." He hadn't understood that when he was younger. He'd thought it was just something his father said, one of those folded-up phrases older men used to avoid actually answering the question. But sitting there in the heat with an empty display case and a register that wouldn't save him thinking about a boy carrying a box of peach pie home with both hands because he wanted to get it there level and whole and perfect, he understood it a little better now. He drove home the long way down Clover Road. He didn't slow down. He didn't stop. He just drove past the yellow house with the broken gutter, and through the window he could see the faint glow of a kitchen light, and for just a second he thought he could almost make out two shapes inside a woman sitting at a table, and a boy standing next to her, and a small white box with a string on top sitting between them. He drove on. He didn't know that the woman inside that kitchen was going to walk into his life in 2 days and change the shape of it permanently. He didn't know that the boy who had stood at his window with $2.30 and serious brown eyes was going to carry something home in that box that had nothing to do with pie. He didn't know that the kindness he'd offered without calculating the return on it was already in motion, already moving toward him from the other direction, the way kindness does when it's real. He just drove home. He ate a peanut butter sandwich standing at the kitchen counter. He looked at his father's index cards on the refrigerator, the handwriting he would know anywhere the words he had memorized but still needed to see. And for the first time in 11 days, he went to sleep before midnight. He didn't know why the anxiety had loosened its grip that night, but it had. Something small had shifted the way a stuck door gives way when you push at exactly the right angle. Not all the way open, not solved, but shifted. He slept 4 hours without waking up. Those 4 hours felt like a gift from somewhere he couldn't name. When he woke at 4 a.m. to start baking, the first thing he did was pull a new peach from the bowl on the counter, press his thumb gently into the skin the way his father had taught him to test for ripeness and begin. Because there was always another pie to make. Especially when you had almost nothing left. That was the whole point. That had always been the whole point. His father knew it. Caleb was starting to remember it. And somewhere on Clover Road, in a yellow house with a broken gutter, a woman named Samantha Parker was sitting across from her son, who was trying to describe the man at the pie truck, his hands, the way he talked, the way he tied the bow on the box, and thinking without meaning to that she wanted to meet whoever had taught a grown man to tie a bow on something he was giving away for free. She didn't say that. She just listened to her son and ate a forkful of peach pie and closed her eyes for 1 single second. It was the best thing she had tasted in 2 years. She told herself it was the peaches. She almost believed it. She would wake up the next morning thinking about a man she had never met whose name was Caleb, who had given her son the last slice and sent it home with a bow, and she would do what Samantha Parker always did when she felt something she wasn't ready to feel. She would get practical. She would do something about it. She would go pay for that pie, and everything, absolutely everything, would begin from there. She was at his truck by 8:15 in the morning. Caleb had only been open 20 minutes. The coffee in his thermos was still hot. He had 2 pies cooling on the rack behind him, a fresh peach and a buttermilk chess, and he was in the middle of writing the day's prices on the small chalkboard he hung from the side window latch when he heard footsteps on the gravel. Quick footsteps. Purposeful. The kind that told you before the person even came into view that they were not browsing, they were arriving. He turned around. She was maybe 30-31, medium height. She had dark hair pulled back the way women pull their hair back when they mean business. Not a style, a decision. She was wearing scrubs, the kind with small geometric patterns, light blue, and she had the look of someone who had come straight from a night shift or was heading into one, the particular exhaustion that lives behind the eyes of people who spend their nights keeping other people alive and their mornings trying to remember what they themselves needed. She walked straight to the window. She didn't look at the chalkboard. She didn't look at the pies. She looked directly at Caleb. "Are you the man who gave my son free pie yesterday afternoon?" Caleb set down the chalk. "Depends on who's asking." "Samantha Parker." She said her name the way people say it when they're not introducing themselves for pleasantries. They're establishing identity before a serious conversation. "Eli's my son, 8 years old, dark hair, striped shirt." "I remember him," Caleb said. "Good." She reached into the front pocket of her scrubs and pulled out a folded bill. She unfolded it on the counter, a 5. "I want to pay for the pie." Caleb looked at the 5. He looked at her. "You don't owe me anything." "I didn't ask if I owed you. I said I want to pay for it." "Ma'am." "Please don't ma'am me. I'm 32 years old and I've been on my feet for 11 hours. She pushed the 5 closer to him across the counter ledge. "My son doesn't take things for free. I don't raise him that way. I'm not angry at you. I understand you meant well, but I need you to take this." Caleb didn't take it. He crossed his arms not defensively, just the way a man stands when he's made up his mind. "Eli didn't take something for free. I gave it. Like I told him there's a difference." She stared at him. He could see her working through her response, not because she didn't have one ready, but because she had several and was deciding which one was worth spending breath on. That was the look of someone who had learned to pick their battles carefully because they were fighting too many of them at once. "He told you why he wanted it," she said. It wasn't a question. "He did. And you thought that meant you could decide what we needed." "No." Caleb's voice was even. "I thought it meant a kid who counted out $2.30 in coins to buy something for his mother's birthday deserved to go home with it. That's all I thought." Something shifted in her face. A small tightening around the jaw. Not anger, or not only anger. Something that lived underneath the anger, something older and more tired than anger. "He counted them out in front of you," she said quietly. "He did. He was very careful about it." She pressed her lips together for a moment. "He told me he just asked if he could pay later. He didn't mention—" She stopped, started again. "He didn't want me to feel bad." "He's a good kid," Caleb said. "He's a great kid," she said, and the way she said it with that swift, fierce precision told him everything about who she was. This was not a woman who accepted compliments about her son by deflecting them. She received them as facts because she knew they were facts, and she knew it because she had paid for every one of them with years of sacrifice that nobody had seen. She picked up the 5. She held it. She didn't put it back in her pocket. "Take it," she said again, softer this time, almost asking instead of demanding. "Here's what I'll do," Caleb said. He turned to the rack behind him and cut a slice from the fresh peach pie he'd made that morning, a proper slice, generous, the crust golden. He put it in a box, tied the string, and set it on the counter. "Keep your 5, but take this home with you. That one's yours, not Eli's." She looked at the box. "I can't." "It's not charity," he said. "My father made this truck so that people in this town could have something good. Not just people who could afford it when everything was easy. People. All of them. He used to say a pie is a small kindness, and small kindnesses are the only thing that actually hold a place together." He slid the box forward. "You look like someone who gives a lot of small kindnesses to other people and doesn't get many back. So." She was very still for a moment. Then she said, "I don't know how to respond to that." "You don't have to," Caleb said. "You can just take the pie." The silence between them was the kind that happens when two people who are both used to handling everything themselves suddenly find themselves in a conversation neither of them planned for and both of them needed. She put the 5 back in her pocket. She picked up the box. "Your name is Caleb," she said. Not a question this time either. Eli had told her. "Yes." "Eli talked about you for almost an hour last night," she said. "About how you tied the bow, how you talked to him. He wants to know how you make the crust." She paused. "He doesn't talk about he doesn't latch on to people easily." Caleb heard what she wasn't saying underneath that. He let it sit without making it awkward. "He can come by any time. I've got nothing against teaching a kid to make a pie crust. My father taught me when I was about his age." Something moved across her face. "How long have you had the truck?" "About a year on my own. My father ran it for 25 before that." "Where's your father now?" "He passed last March." "I'm sorry," she said, and the way she said it told him she understood what that kind of loss felt like from the inside, not just from the outside. It wasn't a social phrase, it was recognition. "Thank you," Caleb said. And then, without exactly deciding to say it, he added, "The truck was his whole life. He built it from nothing. I'm trying to keep it going." He stopped himself there. He hadn't meant to say that much. He wasn't sure why he had. She held the box against her chest and looked at him for a moment. Really looked the way people look when they're registering something they weren't expecting to register. "Good luck," she said, not flippant. She meant it. "You too," he said. She turned and walked back across the gravel, and Caleb watched her go with the specific awareness of a man who has just had a conversation that was supposed to be simple and turned out not to be. He picked up the chalk. He finished writing the prices on the board. But his mind was not on the board. Eli came to the truck the next afternoon. He showed up just after 3 when school had let out, still in his backpack, which he wore with both straps the way earnest kids do. He walked straight to the window with the same focused energy he'd had 2 days before, except this time there was something looser about him. Some of the careful formality from the first visit had been replaced by a cautious brightness, like a door cracked open that hadn't been opened before. "My mom liked the pie," he said. "Good," Caleb said. "She ate 2 slices. She thought I was asleep, but I heard her." Caleb smiled. "Don't tell her that." "I won't." Eli put his elbows on the window ledge and looked into the truck. "You make everything yourself." "Everything. Crusts, fillings, everything." "How? How what? How do you know how to do it?" "My dad taught me," Caleb said. "Same way I can teach you if you want." Eli looked up. The brightness in his eyes went from cautious to immediate. "Right now, if you've got time before your mom gets home, yeah." Eli pulled out his phone, a battered thing with a cracked screen and a rubber case, and checked the time with the gravity of a small person managing a real schedule. "She gets off at 5:30 on Wednesdays. I've got time." So that was how it started. Eli came around to the back of the truck, and Caleb cleared a space on the work counter and showed him how to measure flour, level it off with a straight edge. Don't pack it. Treat it with respect, as Earl used to say, because flour is the foundation, and you don't rush a foundation. Eli listened with both ears and both eyes, the way children listen when they genuinely want to know something, rather than when they're performing attention for an adult's benefit. "My dad used to cook," Eli said quietly while he was measuring. Caleb let that sit for a moment. "Yeah. He made scrambled eggs on Saturdays. He let them get a little brown on the bottom. Mom always said that wasn't how you did it, but we both liked them that way." A pause. "He died 2 years ago. He was working on an electrical line and something went wrong." "I'm sorry, Eli." "It's okay." The boy said it the way children say things they have said many times and have decided is true even when it isn't entirely. Mom says he would have liked your pies." The simplicity of that sentence landed somewhere quiet in Caleb's chest and stayed there. "I hope so," Caleb said. "What was his name?" "Daniel. Daniel Parker." Eli smoothed the flour in the bowl with one finger. "He was really tall, taller than you." "Most people are taller than me," Caleb said, and Eli laughed a real laugh, unexpected, quick, the kind that surprises the person having it. It was a good sound in the afternoon air of the truck in the heat, with the smell of butter and the radio playing low. Caleb thought his father would have liked this boy very much. After that first afternoon, Eli came back. Not every day he was a kid with homework and a mother who maintained a schedule and expectations, but 3 or 4 times a week, always in that after-school window, always with his backpack still on when he arrived. He learned to measure. He learned how to tell when butter was the right temperature by pressing it with one finger. He learned that a good pie crust required cold hands and patience, and that the two things were related. And Caleb learned things too. He learned that Eli was in 3rd grade and was good at math and struggled with reading, not because he was slow, but because the words jumbled on him in a specific way that his teacher had only recently begun to understand. He learned that Eli's mother worked 5 days a week at Linden Pines retirement home, sometimes 6, and that on the nights she worked doubles, she left a plate of food in the refrigerator with a note, and sometimes the note had a small drawing on it, a sun or a star, or once a very poor attempt at a dog that Eli had saved because it made him happy. He learned that Eli still kept a photograph of his father in the front pocket of his backpack, and that he didn't show it to people, but he mentioned it once casually the way children mention the things that matter most to them when they've finally decided it's safe to mention them. Caleb didn't ask to see it. He understood that some things are mentioned, not shown, and the mentioning is the whole point. 2 weeks after Eli first started coming to the truck, Samantha Parker came back. This time she wasn't in scrubs. She was in jeans and a plain gray shirt, and her hair was down instead of pulled back. And Caleb registered all of this without staring and without making it a thing, which took a moderate amount of effort that he did not acknowledge to himself until later. She walked up to the window. "He's been coming here," she said. "He has." "You should have told me." "I figured you knew." "I knew he was going somewhere after school. I asked him where, and he said a friend's." She paused. "He called you a friend." Caleb wasn't sure what to do with that, so he just received it without comment. "Is it—" She started over. "I appreciate what you're doing for him, genuinely. But he gets attached easily to people who are kind to him, and then sometimes those people—" She stopped again. "Leave," Caleb said. She looked at him steadily. "Yes. I'm not going anywhere," he said. Then he caught himself. I'm not planning on going anywhere." And then, because honesty seemed like the only honest option, he said, "Although, to be completely straight with you, I'm fighting to keep the truck right now. The bank there's a situation. I'm doing my best." She was quiet for a moment. "What kind of situation?" "A loan my father took out before he died. I've been trying to stay current, but I had a slow spring and I got behind, and the bank they're not flexible." He shrugged, with a casualness he didn't entirely feel. "I've got some time left to figure it out." She was looking at him differently now. Not with pity, he would have hated pity. With something more lateral than that. More level. The look of someone who knows what it is to have a number in your head at all times that is too large and shrinking too slowly. "How much time?" she asked. "Enough," he said. And then, because she was still looking at him that way, "about 10 days. She pressed her lips together. "Okay," she said. "Okay. Okay." She looked down for a second, then back up. "Eli is not going to take this well if the truck disappears. I want to be prepared." That landed in Caleb like something physical. The idea of telling Eli, of watching that brightness in the boy's face switch off the way a light switches off when the power goes, that was worse than the bank. That was genuinely worse than the bank. "I know," he said, "so you'll tell me if it gets serious." "I'll tell you." She nodded once. She ordered a slice of buttermilk chess pie, paid with exact change, and ate it standing at the counter instead of leaving, which Caleb noted but didn't comment on. And they talked for 23 minutes about Cedar Hollow, about the retirement home where she worked, about two of the residents she clearly loved, in the specific way that people in care work develop love for the people in their charge, protective and unsentimental and real. She talked about a 91-year-old woman named Vera who had opinions about every news story and shared all of them at maximum volume, and who had given Samantha a ring off her own finger 6 months ago because, as Vera put it, you work too hard to have empty hands. Samantha showed him the ring, thin gold band, small stone. She wore it on her right hand. "You kept it," Caleb said. "You don't say no to Vera," Samantha said, and there was a smile in her voice that her face was careful about. The smile was there, but she was managing it the way people manage things. They're not sure they're allowed to show yet. She left at noon and said, "See you around," and Caleb said yes, and he meant it. 3 days later, she was back. And the day after that, not always buying anything. Sometimes she bought a slice. Sometimes she brought him a coffee from the gas station down the road in one of those carry cups, because she said she passed it on her way from work, and it seemed rude to get one for herself and not offer. He took the coffee both times. The second time, he had a slice of apple pie ready for her before she said anything. She looked at the box. "I didn't order that." "Brown sugar crust," he said. "My father thought it was the best thing on the menu. He was right. You should try it before you make up your mind about anything." She tried it. She didn't say anything for a moment. Then she said, "That's the best thing I've eaten since in a long time." "Since," he pressed gently. She looked at him. "Since Daniel used to make Sunday breakfast." She said it without flinching, without qualifying it, just put it right out in the open. He understood what she was doing. She was testing whether the mention of her husband's name would make Caleb uncomfortable, would make him pull back or change the subject the way some people did, as if grief were contagious. He didn't pull back. "Tell me about him," he said. And she did. Not all at once, not easily, but in pieces, the way people tell you about the people they lost. Starting with the small things, the specific things, the scrambled eggs with the brown bottom, and the way he always bought gas when the tank was at half because he didn't like taking chances, and the way he mispronounced certain words his whole life and knew he mispronounced them and did it anyway because it had become the joke between them. She talked about him, and Caleb listened, really listened, without trying to steer the conversation toward anything lighter or make any of it easier than it was, because some things are supposed to be as heavy as they are. And the best you can do for someone carrying them is stand near enough that they're not carrying them entirely alone. When she was finished, she looked at her hands on the counter. "I don't talk about him," she said, "usually." "You don't have to stop," Caleb said. "No, I mean I don't. Not to anyone. Eli and I talk about him at home, but out here—" She gestured vaguely at the world outside the truck. "People don't know how to sit with it. They always want to move you along, give you a timeline, tell you he'd want you to be happy." "He probably would," Caleb said carefully. "But that doesn't mean you have to be happy on someone else's schedule." She looked at him for a long moment. "No," she said, "it doesn't." That night, Caleb sat in the truck after closing and did the math again. 10 days had become 7. 7 days until the bank's deadline. The community fund that the diner owner Phyllis Hartwell had floated the idea of had barely gotten off the ground. People had good intentions and thin wallets. And in Cedar Hollow, the gap between those two things was wide. He had talked to 2 different people about refinancing, and both conversations had ended in the particular way that hopeless conversations end, with a lot of words that don't mean yes. He was sitting with this when his phone buzzed. Unknown number, Cedar Hollow area code. He answered it. "Mr. Whitmore." A man's voice, smooth, practiced. "My name is Gareth Cole. I represent Ridgeline Property Development. I believe you're familiar with our interest in the highway corridor near the town square." Caleb's jaw tightened. He was familiar. "I'm listening," he said. "We've been monitoring the situation with your property, the parking space, and commercial license tied to the truck's current location. We understand you're in a challenging period financially. We'd like to offer you a clean solution." "A solution," Caleb repeated. "The land your truck occupies, the lot, the licensing agreement, the whole footprint. We're prepared to make a very fair offer. Enough to clear your loan with money remaining. You could walk away clean, Mr. Whitmore. No more debt, No more stress. The voice was practiced and pleasant, and Caleb had heard this exact kind of pleasantness before from Pruitt at the bank, from people who used the word clean to describe things that were not clean things that left marks that didn't show. The lot, Caleb said slowly, is where my father parked this truck for 25 years. We understand the sentimental dimension, Cole said. That's why we're being generous with the number. And what goes there if I sell mixed-use development, retail some residential, very modern, it would be a real addition to Cedar Hollow. To the area, yes. Caleb thought about the old oak tree with the missing limbs. He thought about Earl Whitmore crimping pie crust by hand because a machine lacked intention. He thought about Eli counting coins on the window ledge. He thought about Samantha Parker holding a bakery box against her chest with both hands. I'll think about it, he said. Don't take too long, Mr. Whitmore. Our offer has a window. Everything has a window, Caleb said and hung up. He sat in the silence of the truck for a long time after that. He had not told Samantha about the development company. He had not told her about Pruitt's ultimatum with the same specificity he probably should have. He had kept certain things back because he had spent an entire year keeping things back, not because he was secretive, but because he was proud, and pride was the particular way grief had disguised itself in him over the past year, the armor he wore that looked like competence. He didn't know yet that the paperwork he had left in a folder on the passenger seat, the original loan documents, the notices. The payment history was about to become the most important set of papers in his life. He didn't know that Samantha Parker, who had once helped manage financial records for a small electrical business, and who read documents the way some people read maps, looking for what was wrong, what was missing, what didn't fit, was about to notice something in those papers that he had been too exhausted and too heartbroken to see himself. He didn't know any of that yet. What he knew was that it was late, that the deadline was 7 days away, that a man named Gareth Cole had called with a clean solution that would leave a mark that wouldn't show. And that somewhere on Clover Road in the yellow house with the broken gutter, a woman who hadn't wanted anything for herself in 2 years was lying awake thinking about something she wasn't ready to name. He didn't know that either, but he was starting to feel it. The way you feel a change in weather before the sky does anything about it. The way the air shifts before the storm decides what kind of storm it's going to be. He drove home. The pie for tomorrow was already measured. The butter was in the refrigerator. The index cards on the fridge had his father's handwriting sure and clear as it had ever been. He read one of them before he turned off the kitchen light. It said, "The crust is the whole thing. Don't rush it. Don't force it. If it tears, press it back together. It'll hold." He turned off the light. 7 days had a way of moving faster than 7 days should. Caleb knew this the way you know something your body understands before your mind is ready to accept it, the same way you know a storm is coming before the first cloud shows up, the way you know a conversation is about to turn before the other person opens their mouth. He felt the days going. He felt each morning arrive a little more weighted than the one before it, each closing time a little more final. He kept baking. That was the only thing that made sense to him anymore. 4 a.m. flour butter, cold hands. Patience. His father's handwriting on the index cards. The smell of something good being made in the dark before the rest of the town woke up, before the world had a chance to remind him how much trouble he was in. Baking was the one place where the math didn't follow him. But outside the truck, the math followed him everywhere. 6 days left. He had talked to Phyllis Hartwell at the diner again. Phyllis was a good woman, the kind of woman who organized every town function, every bake sale, every benefit dinner, and did it all without being asked and without expecting credit. She had been trying to put together a community fund for 3 weeks. The problem was that Cedar Hollow was a town full of good intentions and limited cash flow. The people who loved Earl Whitmore's pie truck also loved it on a budget, and the distance between affection and money was longer than Phyllis could bridge on short notice. "I've got $260, she told Caleb on Monday morning over the counter of her diner with the same directness she applied to everything. "I know that's not... It's something," Caleb said. "It's not enough, and we both know it," she said. She was not the kind of woman who softened things that didn't deserve to be softened. "I'm still working on it. Mrs. Garrity said she'd contribute. The Hendersons from the hardware store said $50. I've got a few more calls to make." "Phyllis," he said, "you don't have to do this. Earl Whitmore gave me a free slice of apple pie every single week for 4 years when my husband was sick and I couldn't afford to buy things that weren't medicine," she said flatly. "I'm doing this." He didn't argue with her. You don't argue with that kind of love. 5 days left. Gareth Cole called again on Tuesday morning, right as Caleb was opening the truck. "Have you given any more thought to our offer, Mr. Whitmore?" Caleb had not slept well. He was holding a pan of unbaked shells with both hands, and the phone was wedged between his ear and his shoulder, and his patience was at a specific low that happened when he was tired and worried, and someone with a smooth voice was calling him before 8 in the morning to discuss the price of his father's life's work. "I've thought about it," Caleb said, and I'll let you know. "Mr. Whitmore, our offer isn't open-ended. If the bank moves on the loan first, the situation becomes more complicated. We'd rather work directly with you." "I'm sure you would." "The number we're prepared to put on the table, Mr. Cole." Caleb set the pan down carefully. "I'll let you know." And he hung up. He stood very still for a moment with his hands on the counter. He thought about his father, about the 25 years, about the way Earl used to say the truck wasn't a business, it was a conversation, about the fact that Gareth Cole and Ridgeline Property Development didn't want to continue the conversation. They wanted to pave it over and build something modern in its place. He went back to his pie shells. He was still thinking about it when Samantha showed up at 11. She was in her scrubs again, which meant she was on her way to a shift rather than coming from one, and she had 2 coffees, his and hers, in carry cups, and she set them both on the window ledge with the ease of someone who had made this a habit, without either of them formally deciding it was a habit. "You look terrible," she said. "Good morning to you too," Caleb said. "I mean it in a caring way." She pulled her cup toward her. "Have you slept?" "Some? Some isn't a number." 4 hours. She looked at him steadily. How many days left? He appreciated that she didn't dance around it. 5. She nodded once, wrapped both hands around her cup. "What are your options? I've got the community fund that Phyllis is putting together. It won't cover everything, but it's something. I've got—" He stopped, and because she was looking at him with that level, direct look that made evasion feel dishonest, he added, "I've got a development company offering to buy the land. Clean deal. Enough to clear the loan." Her expression didn't change. But they'd put a mixed-use development on this lot. Earl's truck would have nowhere to go. "You could park somewhere else." "It's not about the parking," he said. She looked at him. "No, I know it's not." The silence between them lasted about 4 seconds, but it had the weight of a much longer conversation. "What else?" she said. "That's about it." She looked down at the window ledge. She looked at her coffee. She looked at nothing specific for a moment, in the particular way of someone whose mind has gone ahead of them to examine something. Then she said, "Can I see the loan documents?" Caleb frowned. "Why?" "Because before I became a nursing assistant, I spent 3 years managing financial paperwork for my husband's electrical business. Contracts, loan agreements, licensing, compliance notices. Daniel wasn't good with paperwork, and I was." She said it without any self-consciousness, just stated it the way you state a skill. "I'm not a lawyer, but I know what loan documents are supposed to look like. Can I see them?" "Sam." "Caleb." She said his name the way she said things she meant. Not loud, not sharp, just placed. "You have 5 days. Let me look." He was quiet for a moment. He thought about pride. He thought about what pride had cost him over the past year, all the times he'd said he was fine, all the mornings he'd driven to the truck, telling himself he had a plan when what he had was a direction and a prayer. He thought about his father's index card on the refrigerator. If it tears, press it back together. It'll hold. He went to the passenger seat and got the folder. He handed it through the window. She took it, set her coffee down, and opened it right there at the window ledge. He watched her read. She read the way people read who know what they're looking for, not scanning, not reading every word in order, but moving through the document the way a navigator moves through a map, looking for specific landmarks and noting what was missing. She turned pages. She went back. She went forward. She stopped on one page and read it twice. "When did your father take out this loan?" she asked without looking up. "March 3 years ago, right before the engine replacement. And when did you take over the account after he passed?" Yes, the bank sent paperwork for transfer of liability. I signed it. Did anyone give you a formal notice at that time, a document explaining the restructured terms under your name? Caleb thought about it. There was a lot of paperwork. It was right after he died. I signed what they put in front of me. She turned to another page. She was very still. And when the bank issued the last warning letter, the one that started the countdown, did they include reference to a required notice form, a modification disclosure? I don't know what that is. That's what I thought. She looked up. Her expression was careful. Not excited, she wasn't the kind of person who got excited about paperwork findings, but alert. The way a person looks when they found something real and they're being deliberate about saying it. In Kentucky, when a loan is transferred to a new borrower, meaning when you took over your father's account, the bank is required to issue a formal modification disclosure within a specific window. It outlines the new terms, the new borrower's rights, the payment structure. It has to be signed and filed. Caleb waited. I don't see a copy of that disclosure in here, she said, and the references in the warning letter don't cite it as having been filed. The air in the truck felt different. The way air feels when something shifts, not the shift itself, but the moment just before the held breath. What does that mean? Caleb asked. It might mean nothing, she said carefully. I'm not a lawyer and I could be missing something. But if that disclosure was never properly issued and filed, if the bank transferred the loan into your name without following the required process, then the enforcement timeline they've given you may not be legally solid. You might have more protection than they've told you. You might have grounds to challenge the default notice itself. Caleb stared at her. She held the folder and looked back at him, and for a moment neither of them said anything, because what she had just said was the kind of thing that rearranges the furniture in your head, and you need a second to account for where everything is now. Are you sure? He said. No, I'm not sure. I'm saying look into it. Find someone who can look into it properly. A housing attorney, a financial advocate. There are legal aid services in this county. But Caleb, if I'm reading this right, you have an argument, a real one. He sat back. He ran one hand through his hair. He exhaled slowly through his nose. Why didn't I see this? Because you were grieving, she said. Simply, no judgment in it. And then you were surviving. And those two things don't leave a lot of room for reading the fine print. He looked at the folder in her hands. He looked at her face. And he felt something crack open slightly in the center of his chest. Not break, not collapse. Crack open, the way a seed cracks before it becomes something that grows. He had been carrying this alone for a year. He had been so determined to be the kind of man his father was capable, self-sufficient, smiling through the weight, that he had not let a single person stand close enough to help him carry it. Sam, he said. Don't, she said, but her voice was soft. I was going to say thank you. Oh, she looked down at the folder. Okay. I'm not good at letting people help me, he said, in case you hadn't noticed. I had noticed, she said. Eli's the same way. He comes home with a problem and he sits with it for 3 days by himself before he says anything. She paused. He gets it from his father. Daniel was the same. Is that a polite way of saying I'm stubborn? It's an honest way of saying you're not alone in it. She closed the folder. She held it out to him. Make some calls today. Don't wait. You have 5 days. He took the folder. His hand briefly touched hers. Not intentional, not a moment. Just the ordinary physics of two people passing something between them in a small space. But he was aware of it, the way you're aware of certain things that happen casually and mean more than they look like they mean. He made the calls. The first 2 went nowhere. A housing attorney's office that didn't handle commercial lending, a financial services number that put him on hold for 30 minutes before disconnecting. But the third call to a legal aid organization in the next county, a place called Lakeview Community Legal Services, connected him with a paralegal named Joyce, who listened to his situation with the focused intensity of someone who had been waiting all day for a real problem to work on. He read her the relevant sections. He described what Samantha had noticed. Joyce was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Can you bring the original documents in tomorrow morning?" "Yes," Caleb said. "Do that. I want our attorney to look at this, because if the modification disclosure wasn't filed, you may have a very specific and very real basis to challenge the default notice. That doesn't guarantee anything, but it changes the conversation with the bank considerably. Caleb wrote down the address. He set the pen down. He looked at the folder on the passenger seat. 5 days, but the shape of 5 days had just changed. That evening, just after 6, he was closing the truck when Eli appeared. This was unusual. Eli typically came in the after-school window, not in the evening. He came around the corner of the truck with his backpack on and his hands in his pockets, and something was wrong with his face. Not crying wrong, but the kind of wrong that precedes crying in a person who has decided they will not cry, who has made a deal with themselves about it. "Hey," Caleb said, straightening up from where he'd been wiping down the outside counter. "Isn't it kind of late for you?" Eli stood at the back of the truck. He didn't come up to the window. He stood a few feet back like there was a line he wasn't sure he was allowed to cross. "I need to tell you something," he said. "Okay," Caleb said. He kept his voice level and easy, the way you keep your voice when a child is about to tell you something they've been carrying. "It's my fault," Eli said. Caleb frowned. "What is—" "The truck, the money thing." Eli's jaw was tight. 8-year-old jaw tight, standing outside like he was waiting to be held responsible. "If I hadn't asked you for the pie, if I had just gone home, you wouldn't have given it away, and then Mom wouldn't have come, and then you two would have the money you would have had from that slice." "Eli." Caleb's voice was firm but not sharp. "Stop. I've been thinking about it for 2 weeks," the boy said. "Every time I come here, and I'm not paying for anything, I think about how you're going to lose the truck, and it's because Eli." Caleb walked around the side of the truck and crouched down to the boy's level, not in a dramatic way, just in the way of an adult who understands that certain conversations need to happen at the same height. "Look at me." Eli looked at him. "You did not cause my problems, not 1 cent of them. This truck situation started 3 years ago, before you ever walked across that parking lot. This has nothing to do with 1 slice of pie. But if you had sold it, then I would have had $3.75 more and the same impossible math." He looked at the boy steadily. "You hear me. You didn't start this. You didn't make this worse. You came to the window with $2.30 and you were trying to do something kind for your mother. And what that reminded me of was exactly why my father built this truck in the first place. That's all you did. You reminded me." Eli was looking at him very carefully. The way children look when they're deciding whether an adult is telling them the truth or telling them what they think they need to hear. Eli was the kind of child who could tell the difference. "You're not just saying that," Eli said. "I'm not just saying that." A long pause. "You promise?" "I promise." Eli exhaled. Something released in his small frame, the specific release of a burden set down the loosening of something that had been held too tight for too long. He put his hands back in his pockets. He looked at the ground for a second. "Mom's going to be mad that I came here without telling her," he said. "Probably," Caleb agreed. "Are you going to tell her? That's between you and your mom." Eli looked up at him. The brightness was back, cautious but present. The door cracked open again. "She talks about you," he said. "At home, when she thinks I'm not listening." Caleb kept his expression neutral. "Yeah. She says you're a good man." Eli delivered this with the straightforward honesty of a child who doesn't understand yet why that sentence might land the way it does in a grown person's chest. "She said it to Vera, on the phone." "Who's Vera?" Caleb said, even though he knew. "The old lady at the home. Mom calls her sometimes. She talks to her like she's a friend, not a patient." He paused. "I think she doesn't have that many friends. She works too much." Caleb nodded slowly. He was thinking about a woman who hadn't wanted anything for herself in 2 years. He was thinking about a thin gold ring on her right hand. He was thinking about apple pie with brown sugar crust and how Sam had closed her eyes for exactly 1 second before she said it was the best thing she'd eaten in a long time. "Go home," Caleb said to Eli. "Text your mom and tell her where you are before you get there." "Yeah." Eli started to turn away, then stopped. "Caleb?" "Yeah. I really hope you don't lose the truck." "Me too, kid. But if you do, Eli thought about this carefully, with the particular seriousness of children who are trying to say something important and want to get the words right. It's not the truck that makes it good, it's you. My dad would have said that. He was always saying stuff like that. Caleb looked at this boy, this small, serious, clear-eyed boy who kept a photograph of his father in his front pocket and counted coins carefully and carried guilt that was never his to carry and said things without knowing how much they cost that landed exactly where they needed to. "Your dad sounds like he was a really good man," Caleb said. "He was," Eli said. "The best." And then quietly, "You kind of remind me of him sometimes." He walked away across the parking lot, and Caleb stood very still and let that sentence exist in the air around him until it settled into wherever it was going to live permanently. He went back inside the truck. He sat in the driver's seat. The folder was on the passenger seat, same as always. He called Samantha. She answered on the second ring. "Is Eli with you?" "He just left. He's heading home. He told me he was going to Marcus's house." Her voice had that specific edge of a parent who has just discovered a lie and is managing the response. "He came to tell me something that was bothering him. He's been carrying some guilt about the pie. He needed to hear it wasn't his fault." Silence on her end. "He's been carrying that," she said softer. "For a couple weeks, sounds like." Another silence, longer this time. "He didn't tell me." "He didn't want you to feel worse about the situation. He was protecting you." He heard her exhale, the kind of exhale that is also an acknowledgement of her son's character, of the ways children absorb the weight around them without the adults in their lives always seeing it happen. "He's too much like Daniel," she said, "carries everything quietly, and then it comes out sideways." "He's going to be okay," Caleb said. "He just needed to hear the truth from someone he trusted." "He trusts you," she said. "I know." "So do I," she said. The sentence sat there. 3 words. Simple. And they were not 3 words about the loan documents or the pie truck or the legal aid appointment in the morning. They were about something else. They were about the fact that in 2 weeks and some days, this woman had gone from arriving at his truck window to demand he take her $5 to standing in her kitchen on the other end of a phone call, telling him she trusted him, and both of them knew that the space between those 2 things was significant. "Sam," he said. "Don't make it a big deal," she said quickly. "I'm not. I haven't said that to anyone. In 2 years, I haven't—" She stopped. "I've been very careful. I know. About letting anyone close. I know. And you show up," she said. And there was something rough in her voice now, something unguarded that she hadn't planned on showing, with a pie truck and your father's handwriting on index cards, and you teach my son how to measure flour, and you listen to me talk about Daniel without flinching, and you— She stopped herself. "You make it very difficult to stay careful." Caleb was quiet for a moment. He chose his words carefully because she deserved that. "I'm not asking you to stop being careful," he said. "I'm not asking for anything. I just want you to know that whatever this is, whatever it's been for the last few weeks, it's been the best part of my year, by a long distance." The silence that followed was not an empty one. "Go to that appointment in the morning," she said finally. "Call me after." "I will." And Caleb— Her voice was steadier now, back to that level direct thing she did, but with something underneath it that hadn't been there the first time she'd walked up to his window and set a $5 bill on the counter. "I'm on your side. Whatever happens with the bank, I'm on your side." He said goodnight. He sat in the truck in the dark parking lot for a few minutes after he hung up, not thinking exactly, just sitting with the feeling of someone who has spent a year alone in a loud way, the loud alone of grief, of debt, of constant motion to avoid stillness, and has just experienced the particular quiet that comes when someone tells you they are on your side. He drove home. He set the folder on the table. He made himself eat something. He looked at his father's index cards. He read the one that said, "The crust is the whole thing. Don't rush it. Don't force it. If it tears, press it back together. It'll hold." He had read that card 100 times in the past year. He had always read it as being about pie. He was starting to think his father hadn't only been writing about pie. He set his alarm for 3:30. He had an appointment in the morning and pies to make before it. He turned off the light. The folder sat on the table. Whatever was in those documents, whatever Joyce and the attorney at Lakeview Community Legal Services were going to find in the morning was either going to change the next 5 days or it wasn't. He couldn't do anything about it tonight. What he could do was make the pies. So at 3:30 when the alarm went off, he got up and he went to the kitchen and he began. Flour, butter, cold hands, patience. 4 in the morning in Cedar Hollow, Kentucky, and Caleb Whitmore was still standing. That was something. That was in fact everything. The legal aid office was 40 minutes outside of Cedar Hollow in a town called Marfield that had a courthouse and a dollar store and a barbecue place that opened at 10 in the morning because the people who worked there understood that some days you needed ribs before noon. Caleb drove with the folder on the passenger seat and the radio off. He wasn't in the mood for music. He was in the mood for thinking, and thinking required silence. And silence in the truck always came with the faint smell of butter and vanilla that had soaked into the upholstery over 25 years of his father's work, a smell Caleb had stopped noticing until recently, when he started being aware of things he had been too tired to notice before. 4 days left. He was at Lakeview Community Legal Services by 8:45. The waiting room had plastic chairs and a water cooler with a paper cup dispenser and a bulletin board with resource flyers pinned to it, housing food assistance, medical aid, the practical geography of people in difficulty, people who needed a next step and hadn't found it yet. Caleb sat in one of the plastic chairs and held the folder on his lap and looked at the bulletin board and thought about his father, who would have read every single flyer on that board and known someone who needed each one. Joyce came out at 9 exactly. She was a small woman, maybe 60, with reading glasses pushed up on her forehead and the kind of efficient, unhurried manner that told you she had done this work long enough to know that urgency and panic were different things, and only one of them was useful. "Mr. Whitmore," she shook his hand. "Come on back." The attorney's name was Robert Dean. He was younger than Caleb expected, mid-30s maybe, with a precise way of speaking that wasn't cold but was very careful. The way people are careful when they know that words in their profession have weight, that words in ordinary conversation don't have. He shook Caleb's hand, sat across the table, and opened the folder. He read for 11 minutes without speaking. Caleb watched him read. He watched his eyes move across the pages, watched him turn back twice to earlier pages, watched him make a small note on a legal pad with a mechanical pencil. The room was very quiet. The water cooler in the waiting room made a soft, gurgling sound that carried through the wall. Then Robert Dean looked up. "Okay," he said. "Here's what I see." He laid it out in the careful, structured way of a man who understood that the person across from him needed clarity more than he needed legal jargon. When Caleb's father had died and the loan had transferred to Caleb's name, the bank was required under Kentucky statute to issue a formal modification disclosure document. This document had to outline the new borrower's rights, confirm the new payment terms, and be acknowledged in writing. It had to be issued within a specific window. It had to be filed with a copy retained by the borrower. There was no copy in Caleb's folder. There was no reference to it in the bank's own warning letter, which would normally cite the disclosure in establishing the basis for the default timeline. "That's not an accident," Dean said. He wasn't editorializing. He was reading the pattern the way a doctor reads a scan. "In my professional assessment, this document was either never issued or was not properly filed. Either way, it creates a significant procedural problem for the bank's enforcement action." "What does that mean in practical terms?" Caleb asked. "It means the default timeline they've given you may not be legally enforceable as stated. It means if they try to move on the truck or the licensing before addressing this gap, you have grounds to challenge the action. And it means when you walk into that bank, you are no longer walking in empty-handed." Caleb sat back in the chair. 4 days left. But the 4 days were different now. The 4 days had a different shape. "Can you come with me to the bank?" Caleb asked. Dean glanced at Joyce. Joyce looked back at him. "When do you need to go?" "Tomorrow if possible. Today if necessary." "Let me clear my afternoon," Dean said. He picked up his mechanical pencil again. I'll need 2 hours to prepare a formal letter. We present this to the bank's loan department as a procedural challenge. We are not threatening litigation. We are simply pointing out in writing that the enforcement action as currently structured contains a significant procedural deficiency. Banks don't like deficiencies. They especially don't like deficiencies that can be escalated. Will it work? Caleb asked. Dean set his pencil down. I never promise outcomes. What I can tell you is that you walked in here with what looked like a losing hand. You are leaving with something real to play. How the bank responds depends on the bank. He paused. But whoever found this, whoever looked at these documents and caught it, they did you a significant service. Caleb thought about Samantha Parker at the window of his truck with the folder in her hands and her coffee going cold beside her. He thought about a woman who had learned financial record-keeping to help her husband's electrical business and had carried that knowledge quietly for years, never using it until one morning it became the exact thing that was needed. She did, he said. He called her from the parking lot. She answered before the second ring. How did it go? You were right, he said. About the disclosure document. The attorney confirmed it. Silence. Then, Caleb. We're going to the bank tomorrow. The attorney is coming with me. Sam, he said, whoever found that was doing me a significant service. He paused. That's you. That's what you did. I just read the paperwork, she said. You read the paperwork when I had been too buried in grief for a year to read my own paperwork, he said. That's not nothing. Don't minimize it. He heard her breath on the line. A small sound, not quite a laugh, not quite a release. Something in between. Okay, she said quietly. I won't minimize it. I'll call you after the bank tomorrow. I'll be awake, she said. I don't care what time. He drove back to Cedar Hollow. He opened the truck. He baked through the afternoon on something that wasn't quite adrenaline and wasn't quite hope, but was the combination of the two that makes a person move faster and focus harder and feel, for the first time in a long time, that they are not simply reacting to events, but participating in them. He sold out by 2 in the afternoon. That had not happened in weeks. He was closed and cleaning when Phyllis Hartwell pulled up in her diner's delivery car and rolled down the window. I've got $410, she said. The Hendersons came through, and so did Dr. Reeves and the woman from the flower shop. I can't remember her name. The young one with the red hair, she put in $40 and said Earl once gave her a free pie when she had a bad week and she never forgot. Caleb stood at the window of Phyllis's car. Phyllis, I know it's not the number, she said, but I wanted you to know it's not just me. I know it's not just you. Your daddy built something here, she said, and her voice had that particular roughness that comes when a person is holding something in that deserves to be let out. You don't just let something like that get eaten up by a bank. He thanked her. She drove away. He stood in the parking lot under the old oak with the missing limbs and thought about $410 and a legal letter and an attorney named Robert Dean and a woman on Clover Road who had read his paperwork and found the thing that changed everything. He looked up at the truck, his father's name on the side, the faded paint, the window where Eli had stood with $2.30 and his serious brown eyes. I'm still here, he said to nobody, to the truck, to his father. He wasn't sure which. He went home and slept 5 hours, the best 5 hours he'd had in weeks. The next morning he was at the bank by 10. Robert Dean met him in the parking lot. He was in a jacket and tie, carrying a leather briefcase, and he had the calm demeanor of a man walking into a situation he had walked into many times before and understood the geometry of. He shook Caleb's hand. Let me do the talking initially, Dean said. You answer direct questions, but let me lead. Understood. Understood. They went in. Gerald Pruitt was at his desk when they were shown back. He saw Caleb, and then he saw the man in the jacket with the briefcase, and something shifted in his expression. A small recalibration, the expression of someone who had been expecting one kind of meeting and is adjusting to the reality that it's a different kind. He stood, extended his hand to Dean. Gerald Pruitt, I handle the Whitmore account. Robert Dean, I'm representing Mr. Whitmore in this matter. He set his briefcase on the chair beside him but didn't open it yet. I understand there's been an enforcement timeline communicated regarding the loan in question. That's correct, Pruitt said. He was using his professional voice now, the same rehearsed flatness, but more careful. The account has been in default, and the institution has been more than patient, Caleb said quietly before he could stop himself. Pruitt looked at him. Dean spoke before it became anything. Mr. Pruitt, we're here to discuss a specific procedural concern regarding the transfer of this loan following the death of the original borrower, Earl Whitmore. He opened the briefcase and withdrew a document, the letter he had spent 2 hours preparing. He slid it across the desk. As outlined in this letter, it is our position that the required modification disclosure mandated under Kentucky statute upon transfer of loan liability to a new borrower was not properly issued and filed at the time Mr. Caleb Whitmore assumed the account. Pruitt looked at the letter. He picked it up. He read the first page. His expression was very controlled, but something moved behind it. Not panic. Adjustment. The same recalibration Caleb had seen when they walked in, but deeper this time, more internal. I'd need to review the file, Pruitt said. Of course, Dean said. We'd expect that. We're not here to make demands this morning. We're here to formally put the procedural question on record and to request a review of the enforcement timeline in light of this question. If the required disclosure was properly filed, we'll see that in the documentation and we can have a different conversation. If it was not, he left it there. Deliberately. He didn't finish the sentence because he didn't need to. Pruitt set the letter down. He looked at Caleb. Mr. Whitmore, I want you to understand that the institution's goal here has always been resolution, Caleb said. He had decided during the drive here that he would say exactly one thing if given the opportunity. He said it now clearly and without heat. That's what we want too. Resolution. A fair process, that's all. Pruitt was quiet for a moment. A long moment. I'll need to bring in our compliance officer, he said. We'd welcome that, Dean said. The compliance officer's name was Margaret Park. She was brought in 20 minutes later, 20 minutes during which Caleb and Robert Dean sat in the chairs in Pruitt's office and did not speak to each other and did not need to. Margaret Park was a woman in her 50s with close-cropped gray hair and reading glasses, and the kind of expression that gave nothing away because she had trained it not to. She took the loan file that Pruitt had pulled. She took Dean's letter. She sat at a small table in the corner of the office and read. It took 37 minutes. Caleb counted them. At the end of 37 minutes, Margaret Park looked up and removed her glasses and said something to Pruitt in a voice too low for Caleb to hear. Pruitt's expression did something complicated. He nodded once. Margaret Park turned to Caleb and Dean. We will need to conduct an internal review, she said. However, based on a preliminary examination of the file, I can see that the modification disclosure documentation is incomplete. She said that last word the way people say words they have chosen very specifically because another word would carry more liability. Given this finding, we are not in a position to proceed with the enforcement action as currently structured. The timeline is suspended pending review. Caleb heard those words the way you hear words that you have been waiting for so long that when they finally arrive, they sound slightly unreal, like they're coming from a different room. Suspended. What does the review involve? Dean asked. Our compliance team will assess the full transfer process. If the required documentation was not properly issued, we will be required to reissue it, which restarts certain timelines. We will also review the payment structure in light of the procedural gap. She paused. Mr. Whitmore, we may be reaching out to discuss a restructuring of the remaining balance. Restructuring. How long does the review take? Caleb asked. Up to 30 days, she said. But the enforcement action is suspended effective today. 30 days instead of 4, and a restructuring conversation instead of a default notice. The math in Caleb's head shifted slowly like a heavy door on a stiff hinge, but it shifted. He looked at Pruitt. Pruitt was looking at his desk. Thank you, Caleb said. To Margaret Park, not to Pruitt. She had read the documents honestly. She deserved the thanks. They walked out of the bank. In the parking lot, Robert Dean shook Caleb's hand and said, That is about as good as that could have gone. He was not an effusive man, and that sentence in his register was the equivalent of jumping up and down. Thank you, Caleb said. What do I owe you? Dean waved it off. Legal aid, that's why it exists. He picked up his briefcase. Get someone to make sure those documents are properly filed this time. Don't let it get informal again. He drove away. Caleb stood in the bank parking lot. He called Samantha. She answered immediately. "Tell me." "They suspended the enforcement action," he said. "The review is going to take up to 30 days. They're talking about restructuring the balance." The silence on her end lasted about 4 seconds, and in those 4 seconds, he heard something that was not quite a sound, a breath, a held release, the specific silence of someone who has been tense on behalf of another person, and is now slowly letting that tension go. "Caleb," she said. "Yeah. She stopped. "That's really good." "It is," he said. "Sam, without the documents, without you seeing what was wrong with them, I walk into that meeting with nothing. I probably sign whatever they put in front of me and lose the truck." "You would have figured it out eventually," she said. "Maybe. In 30 days, I wouldn't have had the chance." He leaned against the door of his truck. "I need you to hear that. You saved it. You." Another silence. And then she said something he didn't expect. She said, "I wasn't trying to save the truck." He waited. "I mean, yes, I was trying to help with the truck. But when I asked to see those documents, I wasn't thinking about the truck. I was thinking about you." A pause. "I don't want you to lose what your father left you. Not the truck what he gave you. The reason you got up at 4 in the morning and made pies even when the register was empty, that thing. I didn't want you to lose that thing." He stood very still against the door of his truck in the parking lot of a bank in Cedar Hollow, Kentucky, and let that sentence be what it was. "Samantha," he said. "I know," she said quickly. "I know. I'm not going to complicate it," he said. "I'm just going to say that in the past month you have become—" He thought about the word, chose it carefully. "Important. To me. In a way I wasn't looking for, and I'm grateful for it." The silence this time was a different kind, warmer, less guarded. "Me too," she said. Her voice was quieter than usual. The directness was still there, but underneath it something had opened. "Eli is going to be impossible about this, you know. He already thinks you hung the moon. Eli is a remarkably perceptive kid." She laughed, a real laugh. Not the managed smile he'd seen the first few times she'd come to the truck, a real one, relaxed and sudden, and he felt it in his chest, the way you feel sunlight after a long time in shade. "Come to dinner," she said, and then immediately, "I mean if you want, tonight, nothing fancy. I can cook." "You don't have to cook for me," he said. "Caleb, come to dinner." "Yeah," he said. "Okay. 6 o'clock, Clover Road, Yellow House." "Broken gutter," he said. "I'm going to fix that gutter," she said with the mild indignation of someone who has been meaning to do a thing for months and doesn't need to be reminded about it. He smiled. "I know you are." She hung up. He got in the truck and sat for a moment before starting the engine. He thought about the folder on the passenger seat, which was not there anymore because it was in Robert Dean's briefcase now, and then the bank's compliance office, and then wherever documents go when they become part of an official review. He thought about it the way you think about something that has changed shape. It had gone in as evidence of his failure and come out as evidence of something else entirely. He drove back to Cedar Hollow. He parked at the square. He got out and he walked to Phyllis Hartwell's diner, and he went inside and sat at the counter. Phyllis appeared from the back with the speed of a woman who has eyes everywhere in her own building. She took one look at his face. "Well," she said. "They suspended the enforcement action," he said. "Procedural issue with the original loan transfer. They're doing a review, 30 days. Phyllis put both hands flat on the counter. She looked at him for a long moment. And then she said in a voice that was steady but barely, "Earl would have been so proud of you." Caleb's jaw tightened. He pressed his lips together for a moment. He nodded once. "I had help," he said. "Of course you did," Phyllis said. "That's what help is for." She turned and disappeared into the back, and when she came back, she was carrying a plate with a slice of her own lemon icebox pie on it, which she set in front of him without asking. "On the house," she said. "Earl always said my lemon pie was the one thing on the planet he couldn't improve on. He was right, but I never told him." Caleb ate the pie. It was, in fact, extraordinary. He was at Samantha's door at 6 o'clock. He knocked, and Eli answered it at approximately the speed of a child who had been waiting near the door for the last 20 minutes. "You came," Eli said, as if there had been some question. "I said I would," Caleb said. "Mom said not to make a big deal about it," Eli said, with the cheerful transparency of a child absolutely making a big deal about it. Samantha appeared behind him, wiping her hands on a dish towel. She was in a blue sweater, and her hair was down, and she had the particular kind of controlled nervousness of someone who had invited someone to dinner and was now second-guessing every decision they'd made since then, starting with the sweater. She looked at him. He looked at her. "Hi," she said. "Hi," he said. It was not a complicated greeting, but it was the kind of greeting that happens between two people who have said more difficult and more significant things to each other over the preceding weeks. And when that's the context, even hi carries weight. Dinner was chicken roasted potatoes, green beans from the garden she'd been keeping in the small yard since Eli was 5. It was a real meal, the kind that is made by someone who knows what food is for. It's not performance, it's care, it's the language of, "I thought about what you would like, and I made it." They sat at a kitchen table that had a small scratch on one corner that Eli had made with a toy car when he was 3, and which Samantha had never repaired because it was part of the table, now part of the record of their life in that house. Eli talked through most of dinner. About school, about pie making, about a book he was reading that he didn't like, and a video game he liked more than he was supposed to admit at the dinner table. He talked the way children talk when they are happy, without editing, without agenda, with the pure pleasure of having somewhere to put all the words. Caleb listened to him. He answered questions. He ate the food and meant every compliment he gave about it because they were all true. At one point, while Eli was in the other room getting something he needed to show Caleb, there was a brief quiet moment at the table, just the two of them, the cleared plates between them, the warm light of the kitchen overhead. "This is nice," Caleb said. He meant the food, the room, the evening, all of it. "Yeah," Samantha said. She was looking at the table, not at him, and then she looked up. "It is." And the thing in her eyes, the thing she'd been managing for weeks, keeping it behind the directness and the practicality and the $5 bill on the counter, it was less managed now, less behind things. It was closer to the surface. "I should tell you something," she said. "Okay." "When Eli came home with that pie the night of my birthday, I didn't tell him it was incredible. I mean, I said it was good. I said thank you. But I didn't tell him—" She paused. "I sat at this table after he went to sleep and I cried. Not because I was sad exactly, because it was the first time in 2 years that someone had done something kind for me that I hadn't asked for, or organized, or arranged for myself, and I didn't know how much I missed that feeling until it happened." She pressed her lips together, and it came from a man I had never met through my 8-year-old son tied up with a bow. Caleb didn't say anything for a moment. He sat with it. "I wasn't thinking about all that when I gave him the pie," he said. "I know," she said. "That's what made it matter." Eli came back into the room with a drawing he had done in school, a picture of the pie truck, identifiable by the window, and the chalkboard sign with 2 stick figures that were clearly meant to be himself and Caleb, and a third slightly shorter figure behind the counter. The figures had no detail, no faces beyond 2 dots and a curve, but the truck had more detail than anything else on the page. Every line of the window, the curve of the awning, even the string on the little bow on the bakery box. "It's us," Eli said. "I showed my teacher. She said the truck was the most detailed part." "Because the truck matters," Caleb said. "Because you're in it," Eli said, with the simple correction of a child who knows exactly what he means. Caleb looked at the drawing for a long moment. "Can I keep this?" he asked. Eli looked surprised and then delighted. "Yeah, obviously." He folded it carefully and put it in his jacket pocket. He looked across the table at Samantha. She was watching him with an expression he was starting to be able to read, the one that lived just underneath the surface of her usual steadiness, the one that was neither the careful woman with the $5 bill nor the practical woman with the loan documents, but something simpler and older and more unguarded than either. The one that said she was glad he was there. He was glad he was there too. After dinner, Eli fell asleep on the couch watching television with the complete sudden unconsciousness of children who are happy and fed and feel safe, and Caleb and Samantha sat on the small porch in the warm night air and talked until 10 o'clock. Not about the truck, not about the bank, not about the loan. They talked about his father and her husband, and what it was like to love people who left ahead of schedule, and what you did with all the space that was left behind. They talked about Eli and what kind of person he was becoming, and what that said about Daniel Parker, who had existed in his son long enough to put his best qualities there permanently. They talked about what they were afraid of. That was the conversation that mattered most. Not the practical conversations, not the important conversations about documents and deadlines and default notices, this one. The one that happened at 10 o'clock on a porch in Cedar Hollow when the night had gotten quiet enough that you could be honest without feeling like the honesty was too loud for the room. Samantha said she was afraid of wanting something and having it not be enough, that she had loved someone completely and lost him, and that the distance between those two things was something she measured every day, and the idea of beginning again required believing that the distance could be worth it. Caleb said he was afraid of the same thing from a slightly different angle. That grief had made him quiet in places he used to be open, and he wasn't always sure which of those places were permanent. They sat with those things between them. And then Samantha said quietly the way she said things that cost her something. "I haven't wanted anything for myself in 2 years, not really. I've wanted things for Eli. I've wanted the bills to be manageable. I've wanted Vera to have a good day and Mrs. Patterson to eat her breakfast and the night shift to go smoothly." She looked at her hands in her lap. "But for me, something for me, I haven't let myself want that." She looked up. "Until you." The night was warm and still. Caleb looked at her for a long moment. "I'm not going anywhere," he said. The same thing he had said to her weeks ago at the window of the truck, but with a different weight behind it now. Not the reassurance of a man defending a generous act, but the commitment of a man who has examined the thing in front of him and decided. She looked at him steadily. "I know," she said. And for two people who had both spent a long time carrying everything alone, that was enough. That was in fact more than enough. That was a beginning. The 30 days of the bank's internal review did not pass quietly. Caleb had hoped they would. He had hoped that with the enforcement action suspended and the restructuring conversation on the table, the anxiety would ease the way a fever eases when the medicine finally takes hold gradually, measurably. Until one morning, you wake up and realize you're just a person again instead of a person in crisis. That was what he had hoped for. What he got instead was 30 days of not knowing which is a particular category of difficulty that exhausted people handle worse than they handle actual bad news. Bad news at least you can work with. You can respond to it, argue with it, find a way through it or around it. Not knowing just sits there. It doesn't give you anything to push against. He kept baking. 4 in the morning, flour and butter and cold hands and his father's index cards. He kept the truck open 6 days a week. He kept smiling at every person who walked up to the window, kept learning their names if he didn't already know them, kept remembering that his father built this truck as a conversation, not a transaction, and that the conversation had to keep going, even when the man having it wasn't sure what the next sentence was going to be. Samantha came by every other day, sometimes more. She didn't always buy anything. Sometimes she just leaned on the window ledge with her coffee cup and talked to him while the lunch hour wound down about her residence at Linden Pines, about Eli's week at school, about small things that were not small at all, because small things between two people who have decided to be present for each other are actually the largest category of thing there is. Eli came after school on Tuesday and Thursday and sometimes Friday. He had graduated from measuring flour to making his own dough under supervision, and he approached this the way he approached everything, with focused seriousness and occasional frustration, when it didn't go exactly right, and a willingness to start over that Caleb found genuinely admirable in a 9-year-old, because most adults didn't have it. "It tore again," Eli said one Thursday afternoon, looking at a split in his pie crust, with the expression of someone personally betrayed. "Press it back together," Caleb said. "It's going to show." "Maybe. Does it hold?" Eli pressed the tear carefully with 2 fingers. He checked it. "Yeah." "Then it holds. The mark is part of it now." Caleb glanced over at him. "My dad used to say you can always tell a handmade crust because of the imperfections. If it's perfect, a machine made it. If it's got marks, a person did." Eli studied the patched crust. "I like that," he said. "Me too," Caleb said. He was right about most things. My dad was right about most things too, Eli said, with the natural ease of a child who has learned to say his father's existence in the past tense without it costing him everything every time. That ease had come slowly, Caleb knew. It had not been there in the early weeks. It was something Eli was building the way you build any hard thing, one small act of it at a time, until one day you look back and realize you've built further than you thought. On the 14th day of the review, Caleb got a call from Margaret Park at the bank. He was in the middle of rolling a crust when his phone buzzed on the counter. He looked at the number, recognized it from the bank, and set down the rolling pin with the specific controlled steadiness of a man who has decided in advance that he is not going to let the moment hit him before he knows what the moment is. "Mr. Whitmore," she said. Her voice was professional, neutral. He could not read anything from it. "I wanted to give you an update on the internal review." "I'm listening," he said. "The compliance assessment has been completed. Our team confirmed that the modification disclosure was not properly issued at the time of the loan transfer following your father's death. This is a procedural deficiency on the bank's part." A pause. "As a result, the previous enforcement timeline is voided. We are prepared to offer a loan restructuring under new terms, which would include a reduced remaining balance to account for the procedural gap, a lower monthly payment spread over an extended term, and a formal waiver of the late fees accrued during the disputed period." Caleb's hand was flat on the counter. He didn't move it. "What does the reduced balance look like?" She gave him the number. He did the math. Not the desperate math of the last 11 months, the other kind, the math that actually adds up, the math that looks like a future instead of a wall. "That's workable," he said. His voice was steady. "We'll need you to come in to sign the restructured agreement," she said, "within the next 10 business days. Does that work?" "That works," he said. "Good." Another pause. And then Margaret Park did something Caleb had not expected, she said, in a voice that was still professional but marginally less clipped than usual. "For what it's worth, Mr. Whitmore, the review team agreed that the original process was not handled correctly. The institution regrets the inconvenience to you." Regrets the inconvenience. It was a banker's language polished smooth by years of use, but he heard underneath it what it actually meant, which was, you were right and we were wrong, and here is what right looks like in the end. "Thank you, Miss Park," he said. He hung up. He stood in the truck for 30 seconds without moving. Then he picked up his rolling pin and he finished the crust. He worked it to the edge of the pan and crimped it by hand, the way his father had taught him, pressing each fold with deliberate intention. When it was done, he stepped back and looked at it. It was not perfect. There was a slight irregularity on the left side, a crimp that was a fraction deeper than the others. It had a mark. A person had made it. He put it in the oven. Then he called Samantha. She was between patients at Linden Pines, she said, when she answered, speaking quietly. "Tell me fast." "They voided the enforcement timeline," he said. "Confirmed the procedural deficiency. They're restructuring the loan. Reduced balance. Lower payments fees waived." The silence on her end lasted exactly long enough for him to understand that she had been holding more tension about this than she had ever shown him. Then she said, "Caleb," just his name. But the way she said it contained the entire weight of the last 30 days, and the 30 days before that, and the night on the porch, and the folder on the window ledge, and the $5 bill on the counter, and all of it compressed into 2 syllables. "Yeah," he said. "I need to finish my rounds," she said, and he could hear the smile in her voice now, the real one, the unmanaged one. "But tonight, Clover Road, come for dinner, and bring something." "What do you want?" "Peach," she said immediately. "The last time I had peach was my birthday, and you gave it to my son." "I know," he said. "I remember." He spent the rest of the afternoon baking the best peach pie he had ever made. He used Mrs. Garrity's peaches. She had been bringing them every week since he'd mentioned they were his favorite, quietly and without ceremony, just leaving a bag on the window ledge on Saturday mornings, the way women of her generation performed love without announcement, without expectation, in the specific language of food given freely. He made the filling the way his father had, with a hand-squeezed lemon and a pinch of cardamom that Earl called the secret and that Caleb had been keeping faithfully. He made the crust by hand. He crimped the edge carefully and pressed the marks in with intention. He tied the box closed with the white string. He tied a bow. He drove to Clover Road. Eli answered the door before he'd finished knocking. "She's been checking the window every 5 minutes," Eli announced, at a volume audible to anyone within a reasonable radius. "Eli!" Samantha's voice came from the kitchen with the specific tone of a parent who knows exactly what their child is doing and has decided that full intervention is not worth the effort. "It's true, though," Eli said to Caleb, completely unrepentant. Caleb handed him the box. "Put this on the table, carefully." Eli took it with both hands, the same way he had taken that first box level, deliberate, the posture of someone who understands that certain things require care. He carried it to the kitchen table and set it down and stood back and looked at the white string and the bow with an expression that Caleb caught from the doorway and would not forget. The boy was proud, not of himself, of Caleb. There was a difference, and Eli's face showed the difference clearly. Dinner that night was loud and warm and good, in the specific way of evenings that you know while they are happening, that you will carry for a long time. Eli talked about school, about a project on weather systems that he had become unexpectedly passionate about a classmate who had finally admitted he was wrong about something Eli had been right about for weeks, a vindication he described with measured but unmistakable satisfaction. Samantha talked about Vera, who had, at 91 years old, begun writing a memoir at Samantha's suggestion and had declared that the first chapter was going to be about food, specifically about a pot roast her mother made in 1948, because Vera said that was where everything worth remembering in her life began. Caleb listened to both of them and thought about his father, who had always said the most important thing you could do at a table was listen more than you talked. He was right about that, too. After Eli went to bed, they sat at the kitchen table with the peach pie between them. Samantha cut 2 slices, and they ate without talking for a moment, and then she set her fork down and looked at him. "What happens now?" she asked. "I sign the restructured agreement next week," he said. "New terms. It's manageable." "I mean, after that, what does the truck look like from here?" He thought about it honestly. "I need to build the customer base back. I lost some ground this spring. The community fund that Phyllis put together helped. I want to do something with that, pay it back somehow. Not the money, but—" "The conversation," Samantha said. He looked at her. "Yeah, exactly." "Your dad would have said that," she said. "He did say that." He paused. "I've been thinking about something. There's a farmer's market in Marfield on Saturday mornings. I've never gone because I was always here, but with the bank situation settled, I think there's room to expand a little. New customers, new towns." "That's good," she said. And then quietly, "Eli wants to go with you sometime. Not just to bake at the truck, he means on a run. A real one. Early morning." "I know," Caleb said. "He mentioned it. Is that okay?" "Sam?" He looked at her evenly. "When have I ever given you a reason to think any part of that would not be okay?" She looked at her hands on the table, then back at him. "Never," she said. "You haven't. I'm still just—" She shook her head slightly. "I ask too many permission questions. Daniel always said that. He said I apologized for things that didn't need apologizing for." "He was right," Caleb said. "But for what it's worth, I understand why. You've been managing everything alone for 2 years, and you've gotten used to checking every decision twice, because there's been nobody to catch you if you get something wrong. That's not a character flaw. That's what surviving looks like." She was very still for a moment. "You do that," she said. "Do what?" "Say the thing that's actually true instead of the thing that sounds nice. Most people don't know the difference." She looked at him. "Daniel did. And then he was gone, and I spent 2 years around people who said the nice thing, and I didn't realize until you how much I'd missed the actual true thing." Caleb reached across the table and put his hand over hers, not dramatically, not with any ceremony, just placed it there warm and certain. She turned her hand over and held his. They sat like that for a long time, talking, and not talking in the warm light of the kitchen on Clover Road. When he drove home that night, he had the drawing Eli had made weeks ago still folded in his jacket pocket, transferred from jacket to jacket every time he changed, and a new feeling in his chest that was not the absence of grief, but the presence of something alongside it. He had learned over the course of this year that those two things could coexist. The grief did not have to finish before the other thing could begin. They could live together. They could inform each other. They could make you if you let them into something more than you were when you were only carrying one of them. He went home. He set his alarm for 3:30. He slept 7 hours. In the morning, he made pies. He signed the restructured agreement 8 days later in a conference room at the bank with Robert Dean beside him, and the folder that had started all of this, now replaced by new documents, clean ones properly issued and properly filed. Gerald Pruitt was not in the room. Margaret Park was. She shook his hand when it was done and said, "Good luck with the business, Mr. Whitmore." And he thanked her and meant it, and walked out into the morning air and stood next to his truck and breathed. His father's name on the side, faded but legible, still there. He called Phyllis first. She cried, which she would deny categorically if you brought it up later. Then he called Samantha, who said good, and then said the word again quietly like she was putting it somewhere permanent. 2 weeks after the signing, Caleb opened the truck on a Saturday morning to find that Phyllis Hartwell had done something. She had told people. Not in an organized way. No announcement, no event, no banner. She had just told people the way people in small towns tell each other things that matter, one conversation at a time, and the information had spread, the way good news spreads, in a place where people still know each other's names, not algorithmically but personally carried person to person, arriving differently in every house but arriving. By 10 o'clock, the line at the truck stretched past the old oak tree. Not a crowd like a spectacle, a crowd like a community. Mrs. Garrity, in her good cardigan, the Hendersons from the hardware store Dr. Reeves, who had contributed to the community fund, the young woman with red hair from the flower shop, who had put in $40 because Earl once gave her a free pie on a bad week. People Caleb knew, people Caleb had forgotten he knew, people he was meeting for the first time who said, "My grandmother used to come here every Friday," or "I heard about the boy and the peach pie and I wanted to see the place for myself." That last sentence stopped him when the first person said it. He looked up. "Where did you hear that?" The woman, middle-aged, warm-faced, from a town up the highway he didn't recognize, shrugged. "Phyllis at the diner told somebody who told my sister. She said a little boy asked a man to wait till tomorrow to pay for his mother's birthday pie. And the man gave it to him anyway, even though he was about to lose everything." She looked at the truck at the sign at Caleb. "I wanted to buy a pie from somebody like that." Caleb stood at his window and looked at the line. He thought about his father, who had spent 25 years building something that now, in its moment of almost ending, was showing him what it had actually built. Not a customer base, not a business, a memory, a story. The kind of story that travels, not because it is dramatic, but because it is true, because it carries in it something that people recognize as mattering. He baked everything he had. He sold out by 1 in the afternoon. He made more that night and sold out again by noon the next day. On the third day, Eli showed up at 5:30 in the morning. He knocked on the side of the truck. Caleb looked up from the counter. "You said I could come on a real run sometime," Eli said. He was in a hoodie backpack on the early morning, still dark around him. Behind him, at the edge of the parking lot, Samantha's car was idling. She had driven him. She was not coming in. This was Caleb understood something Eli had asked for, and she had arranged, and the arranging of it was its own kind of gift. "You're early," Caleb said. "You're always early," Eli said. Caleb smiled. He opened the back of the truck. "Get in," he said. "I'll show you the rest of the process." Eli climbed in with the solemnity of someone entering a place they have wanted to be for a long time and are determined to do right by. He washed his hands without being asked. He stood at the counter and waited. "First thing," Caleb said, "is the flour." He pulled out the measuring cup. He handed it to Eli. "You know how." "Level it off," Eli said. "Don't pack it. Treat it with respect." "Exactly." Caleb watched him measure. "Your dad would have known how to do this," he said. Not with any agenda, just because it was true, and because Eli deserved to hear it said plainly. Eli moved the flour to the bowl. "He would have liked it here," he said. "The early morning, I mean. He always got up early. He said the best hours were the ones before the world got loud." Caleb was quiet for a moment. "My dad said the same thing." Eli looked up at him. "Do you think they would have been friends if they'd known each other Caleb thought about Earl Whitmore and Daniel Parker, about what Eli had told him of his father over the months, the scrambled eggs with brown bottoms, the half-tank rule, the way he mispronounced certain words and knew it and kept going, the goodness of him, the solidity of him, the fact that he had raised this boy and left enough of himself in him that the boy carried him everywhere in a front pocket and said he was the best, with the certainty of someone who knew exactly what they were talking about. "Yeah," Caleb said. "I do." Eli nodded, satisfied with this. He went back to measuring. They baked for 3 hours. When the sun was fully up and the morning was no longer dark, but the warm particular gold of a Kentucky summer morning at 8 o'clock, Eli looked at the rack where 4 completed pies were cooling and said with a deep and genuine satisfaction, "We made those." "We did," Caleb said. "My name should be on the sign," Eli said, and then immediately, "I'm kidding." "I know you are," Caleb said, "but someday, if you want it to be, it can be." Eli looked at him with the level brown eyes that had started everything that had looked up from $2.30 on a ledge, and asked with no guile and no calculation, just the simple hope of a child who still believed in the decency of adults, whether he could pay tomorrow. "Really?" he said. "Really?" Caleb said. Eli considered this for a moment with the seriousness it deserved. Then he nodded once, the same single nod his mother gave when she had received and accepted a truth. Caleb saw it immediately. He almost said something about it, about how much like her Eli looked in that moment. He decided to keep it. Some things were for him alone. 6 months after the morning that had started with a bank folder and ended with a dinner on Clover Road, Caleb had the truck repainted. Not a dramatic change. The same color approximately, but fresh. The old paint had been going dull for 2 years, the kind of slow fade you don't notice until something makes you look at it directly, and then you see it everywhere. He had it done by a man named Tony from 2 towns over, who had painted barns and houses, and once a very large mural on the side of a grain elevator, and who understood that some jobs required more care than the hourly rate justified. Tony was happy to provide that care because he had grown up eating Earl Whitmore's pies at the county fair and said so without ceremony. The sign still read, "Whitmore and Father." Caleb had not changed it. He was not going to change it. That sign was not about who was running the truck. It was about who built it, and that fact was as permanent as any fact he knew. But when Tony finished, there was space below the sign, and Caleb had thought about what to put there for 2 weeks before he arrived at the answer. He had not arrived at it alone. It was Eli who painted it. Not professionally. Eli was 9 years old with a steady hand and specific opinions about lettering, and more patience than most adults, Caleb knew. He had practiced it 6 times on paper before he touched the truck. He had looked up fonts online until he found one that felt right, and then free-handed it himself with a small brush tongue between his teeth. The particular concentration of a child doing something they understand is permanent. When it was done, Caleb stepped back and read it. Below Whitmore and Father in Eli's careful hand it said, "Made with heart." He stood and looked at those 3 words for a long time. Made with heart. His father's philosophy in 3 words captured by a boy who had never met Earl Whitmore but had understood him through the truck and the pies and the index cards and the stories Caleb had been telling without fully realizing he was telling them. The boy had listened and absorbed and translated, and here it was on the side of the truck, permanent. "Is it good?" Eli asked from behind him. His voice was careful, hopeful, but managed. Caleb turned around. "It's exactly right," he said. "It's exactly what it should say." Eli's face broke into the full, unmanaged version of his expression that Caleb had been seeing more and more over the months, the one without the careful management, the one that was just the boy being happy without qualifying it. Samantha was standing a few feet back. She had not said anything yet. She was looking at the truck at the new line at her son's handwriting on the side of something that would now carry it wherever it went. Her expression was the one Caleb had come to understand as her version of the same thing, the unmanaged one, the one she reserved for moments that were genuinely too much for the practical, level-voiced $5 bill version of herself to contain. She was not crying. She was close. She looked at Caleb. He looked at her. "Your dad would have loved that," she said. "Yeah," Caleb said. "He would have." 1 year after the afternoon that started everything. 1 year after a boy with dark hair and a striped shirt with a hole in the shoulder walked across a gravel lot and counted out $2.30 on a window ledge. Eli Parker walked up to the truck. He was 10 now, a fraction taller. The cracked screen phone had been replaced with a slightly less cracked screen phone. The backpack was the same. He reached into his pocket and put a $5 bill on the ledge. No coins. No counting. No asking if he could pay tomorrow. A $5 bill flat on the counter. No hesitation. "1 peach slice, please," he said. "Paid in full." Caleb looked at the 5. He looked at Eli. He picked up the bill and held it for a moment. He thought about $2.30. He thought about a bow on a white box. He thought about a woman who arrived at his window to demand he take her money and stayed to read his documents and found the thing that saved everything. He thought about dinner on Clover Road and early mornings with flour and cold hands and the word important said over a phone in a parking lot and 3 words painted on the side of a truck by a child who had listened more carefully than anyone knew. He set the 5 back on the ledge. "This one's on the house," he said. Eli laughed, immediately fully without the managed version at all. "I knew you were going to say that," he said. "Then why did you bring the 5? "Because it felt right." He picked up the bill and pocketed it. "Like how you still tie the bow even when nobody asked for one." Caleb looked at this boy. He looked at him the way you look at someone who has said something you will not forget. Said it casually and completely, the way people say the true things when they don't know they're being profound. "Your dad taught you that," Caleb said. "That thing about doing the right thing even when nobody asked." Eli nodded. "You did too," he said. Simply, matter-of-factly, the way he said everything that he meant completely. Caleb cut the slice. He put it in a box. He tied the string and he tied the bow and he set it on the ledge. Eli picked it up with both hands level and careful, the same as the first time. He walked away across the lot. Samantha was waiting at the edge of the parking lot, keys in hand, watching her son carry the box, the same way he had carried it a year ago, both hands level, deliberate, the posture of someone who understands that some things require care. She looked at Caleb through the window. He raised one hand, she raised hers. That was all. That was enough. Inside the truck, Caleb turned to the rack. He had 3 pies cooling peach apple with brown sugar crust buttermilk chess. He had 20 minutes before the lunch crowd. He had a farmer's market run on Saturday, and Eli was coming with him, and they were leaving at 4:30 because Eli had decided 4:30 was the right time and had set his own alarm to prove he was serious. He had his father's name on the side of his truck. He had 3 words underneath it that said everything that mattered. He had a woman who had walked up to his window to pay for something that was never for sale and stayed to become the thing he hadn't known he was waiting for. He had a boy who counted coins carefully and carried his father in his front pocket and pressed torn things back together and asked with no guile and complete trust whether the world would wait for him till tomorrow. And the world had said yes. Not because the world was always generous. It was not, and Caleb knew this, had learned it at 4 a.m, with debt in his head and grief behind his sternum and a register that didn't add up. The world was not always generous, but sometimes in the specific, unannounced way of things that matter, it handed you a moment where a small act of giving came back to you in a form you never could have planned for, in a form that was larger and truer and more permanent than what you had given. A free slice of pie, tied with a bow, given to a boy who asked if he could pay tomorrow. That was where it started. And what it became, what it built quietly and without announcement over the months that followed, through debt and documentation and long phone calls and early mornings and dinner tables and kitchen lights and the particular bravery of 2 people who had both lost something irreplaceable and chosen carefully and deliberately to begin again. What it became was not luck. It was intention. It was the thing his father had been trying to tell him all along in the index cards and the hand-crimped crusts and the free slices given to people who needed them in the 25 years of 4 a.m. mornings and the worn rolling pin and the photo taped inside the cabinet. The crust is the whole thing. Don't rush it. Don't force it. If it tears, press it back together. It'll hold. It held. Caleb Whitmore stood in his father's truck with his father's name on the side, and a boy's handwriting underneath it, with flour on his hands and the smell of peaches in the air, and a life that had been torn and pressed back together and was absolutely holding. And he thought about none of this in a grand way, because he was not a grand way kind of man. He just picked up the rolling pin. He put his hands on the dough. He began. And in Cedar Hollow, Kentucky, on the kind of ordinary morning that turns out to be the kind you never forget, that was everything. That was and always had been exactly enough.